Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and on this channel we've been closely covering the patch 1105, WoW's 20th anniversary update, especially when it comes to all the different class and hero spec changes. And the update as of today is finally going live, at least over in the NA realms. And all the class changes we've been covering over the last few weeks are finally going to be available and playable. And I wanted to go over every single class change that's arriving with the 1105 update, which is a fairly massive and quite a comprehensive update regarding a large variety of playstyles. As it is a long project, I do have chapter marks down below so you can easily skip to the classes that are the most relevant to you. Because this is a long one, I do kind of just want to get into it as soon as possible. But right before that, if you want to see regular updates for the WoW expansion, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive into every single class change that's arriving today with the 1105 update. Starting things off, when it comes to class changes, the Dracthyr are probably getting the biggest number of them, as they're getting actually access to a lot more class options from hunters, rogues, priests, mages, warriors, and warlocks, though they are doing some adjustments towards the Dracthyr ratios for non-evoker variants. This means that abilities like the passive of glide is not going to be as quick as that evoker, but it's still faster than normal running speed, except for classes like rogues, for instance. You also get the racial wing buffet that you can utilize every 3 minutes, but you won't get the tail swipe that stays with the evoker variant. But non-evoker Dracthyr will be able to choose whether they want to stay in combat form as a dragon or as their visage, and they're not forced to switch between one form or the other, and you can kind of pick and choose whichever form you want to run around in, which is going to give Dracthyr quite a lot of options as of the patch 1105. As for all the actual class changes, we start off with the class of Death Knight, which is primarily seeing adjustments to the Deathbringer playstyle. The Deathbringers are seeing a number of changes, primarily to help improve some of the choice options for Deathbringer, while also taking some of the more popular talents and making them more standalone within the talent tree. Things such as the Painful Death talent actually is baked in as part of Exterminate, so you always have two sites that you can use as a Deathbringer Death Knight natively. You also get a new competitive option between Grim Reaper as well as Reaper of Souls. With Grim Reaper, Reaper's Mark initial strike will grant you Killing Machine or 3 charges of Bone Shield depending on your spec. Reaper's Mark damage also is scaled up depending if the target has lower health, with the ability to do up to 30% additional damage. Though it's a choice note with Reaper of Souls, where whenever you apply Reaper's Mark to the target, the cooldown of Soul Reaper is then reset, and the next Soul Reaper after using the ability will cost no resources and will explode regardless of the target's health, making it more usable as a combat ability. Soul Reaper's damage is also being amped by 20% with that talent choice node. The popular pick of Wither Away gets its own location within the Deathbringer talent tree, which serves as a fairly solid buff to the Deathbringer playstyle in general. Swift and Painful is a new talent that replaces Swift End. If no enemies are struck by Soul Rapture, you then gain 10% strength for 8 seconds, and Wave of Souls is 100% more effective on its primary target of Reaper's Mark. Though the defensive talent of Runecarved Blades does become a little bit less effective as of this update, where the physical damage as well as magic damage reduction is being lessened a little bit, though Deathbringer still serves to be a very popular and a very solid pick for Blood Death Knights going forward. Speaking of Blood Death Knight specifically as the Saint Lion playstyle, we saw a decent change that does help Saint Lion a little bit, though it'll likely won't be better than Deathbringer, but that is going to be to change the ability of Gift of the Saint Lion, which instead of proccing off of Empiric Blood, it will instead work off of your Dancing Rune weapon, which has a lot better synergy with the Saint Lion playstyle, while allowing Van Blood to be a purely defensive ability, which is a good change overall. Frost Death Knights do see a slight nerf, however, specifically with the talent of Arctic Assault, which will fire a Glacial Advance at 80% effectiveness, which was previously 100% effectiveness. Though Frost Death Knights that are picking up Deathbringer, which is a very popular combo, the changes coming out to Deathbringer more than make up for this nerf to the Arctic Assault talent ability. Then we have the class of Demon Hunter, where we see a number of cosmetic changes such as icons for Sigil of Spite as well as the Hunt are going to be updated as of this build. Valscar Demon Hunters are seeing a slight adjustment to the Focused Hatred talent. The talent of Focused Hatred now has scaling factor to it. Previously, it would either grant you a 50% damage buff when hitting a single target, or the bonus would be disabled when hitting more than one target. Now, the damage bonus scales by 10% for each additional target, reduced by 10% for 50, down to 40 at 2 targets, 30 at 3 targets, and so on. For Vengeance Demon Hunters, they changed the way that Metamorphosis functions. Metamorphosis will now heal Vengeance Demon Hunters for 40% of the maximum health instead of modifying the current health. Casting Metamorphosis while Demon form is already active will no longer heal you, but triggering Last Resort will always heal you for 40% of your max base health. And the next class is the Druid, which is seeing a large number of changes. First of all raid buffs, including the one that Druid brings, which is Mark of the Wild, has seen its mana cost reduced from 4% of your mana down to 1% of your mana, and all the other classes with the raid buff that they can apply on allies also see a similar mana cost reduction. You also saw a bunch of icon changes for Druids, with abilities such as Convoke and Adaptive Swarm getting a slightly different icon this time around. When it comes to Druid of the Coral, Ravage now has a slightly longer window to consume the ability proc. So when you get a proc of Ravage, you will have now 20 seconds instead of 16 seconds to be able to consume it, to be able to benefit fully from the main ability of that hero spec. And as for Elune's Chosen, arcane spells cast by Convoke, the spirits will now help trigger the procs of Lunation, which may lead to better cooldown reduction. Out of the 4 Druid specs, however, Bounce Druid is the one seeing the most amount of changes, starting with brand new talents such as Sunseeker Mushroom, where Sunfire has a chance to spawn a mushroom under your target, which will function exactly the same as normal mushrooms, but gives you an option between a passive option or an active option of that ability. A new talent of Whirling Stars replaces Great Shore Alignment, changing Celestial Alignment's cooldown reduced to 100 seconds CD, but now gives the ability to charges, though the duration of the ability is reduced by 20%. Which gives Celestial Alignment a little bit of a in-the-moment burst window that has a lot more flexibility to it. A brand new talent of Astronomical Impact changes the way that Bounce Druids scale by allowing critical strike attacks with astral spells to be increased by 20%, which gives them a little bit better crit value as a stat. A new talent of Crashing Star allows Shooting Stars a 50% chance to be replaced instead with a Crashing Star, which deals significantly more damage and generates more astral power. A new talent of Hail of Stars allows casting a free Star Surge or Starfall to grant you Solstice for 3 seconds, which causes your Shooting Stars to fall more often. Free spells cast by abilities such as Convoke the Spirits also grant you 1 second version of this effect. Touch of the Cosmos is another talent where casting Wrath in an Eclipse has a 12% chance to make an Star Surge or Starfall free, while casting Starfire during an Eclipse has an 18% chance to make your Star Surge or Starfall free. Also, Bounce Druids will no longer need to talent into Starfall as the ability becomes a baseline and would deal 10% additional damage. Both versions of New Moon and Half Moon are buffed up, New Moon by 20% and Half Moon by 10%. Though the spec did see some talent nerfs to compensate for some of the newer adjustments, where we see power reductions for a handful of talents, such as Rattle the Stars, where they're toning back the damage increase of Star Surge and Starfall. We see reductions to Umbral Intensity, as well as the reduction to the amount of resources generated by Warrior of Elune. Nature's Grace no longer grants you additional combat bonus, and Orbit Breaker takes a little bit longer for you to build up to a full moon, where it takes you 30 shooting stars instead of 25. Though certain talents such as Power of the Cauldron, as well as Umbral Intensity, do become a 1 talent point cost instead of a 2 talent point cost, with some of the ability effects adjusted in order to account for the overall power. And spells such as Convoke the Spirits will now proc off of passive effects such as Star-Lord. Besides this, they also added a few more connections within the Bounce Druid's talent tree and moved a handful of talents around to hopefully give them a little bit better talent build flexibility. Also, Bounce Druids that play with Elune's Chosen to pick up Lunar Calling will now see an increase to the Starfire damage being buffed up to 100% rather than 80%. And Keeper of the Grove Bounce Druids will see an adjustment towards Potent Enchantments talent, which will cause Whirling Stars, a brand new talent that functions with your Incarnation or Celestial Alignment, to reduce the cooldown of Celestial Alignment by an additional 10 seconds. And from there we move on to Restoration Druids, where we see one big quality of life adjustment, which is Omen of Clarity becoming something that Restoration Druids will learn baseline. Also, the PvP talent of Reactive Resin also becomes something that Restoration Druids learn baseline, which is mostly a PvP healing over time protection, but whenever your hearts are removed by enemy effects, they're replaced with the Reactive Resin that will heal allies over 6 seconds, and that healing may overlap one another. So it's mostly a PvP buff rather than anything. Besides this, we also do see some new talents such as Twin Leaf, which gives Nature Swiftness to charges. A brand new talent of Wildwood Roots, where Abundance now also reduces the cast time of regrowth by 5% per stack, while Scenario Ward's cooldown is reduced by 10 seconds, but its duration is increased also by 2 seconds. A new talent of Renewing Surge allows the cooldown of Swiftment to be reduced by up to 40% based on the current target's health. Where you get better cooldown reduction on the ability, the lower the health of your target is. A new talent of Forest Flow adds a new functionality for clear casting, where consuming clear casting with regrowth also allows you to cast a nourish onto a nearby ally at 60% effectiveness, and those free nourishes will prefer to be cast on allies with your active healing over time effects to maximize the value of the nourish ability. And lastly, the talent of Dream Mercenaries has been redesigned, where Wrath and Shred will transfer 50% of their damage to heal a nearby ally. Starfire and Swipe will transfer 33% of their damage to heal a nearby ally, and this effect is increased by 200% while Heart of the Wild is active. Next, we have the class of the Evoker, which is going to be the only class that gains access to the Tail Swipe ability, where non-Evoker Dracthyr are not actually going to be able to get this, so Tail Swipe in a way becomes an Evoker ability rather than a racial ability in fact. We also had all the quality of life updates such as Evoker's Permanent Chill has become a baseline ability for the Evoker, which is a pretty decent bonus. Talents like Unravel are gaining 25% additional damage. And the Blessing of the Bronze Dragonflight also sees a mana cost reduction similar to that of a Druid's, reduced down to 1% of your overall base mana. Then we have the talent like Renew and Blaze, which has been adjusted to be a little bit more consistent. It is now no longer affected by healing received modifiers that are either positive or a negative. So Warrior's Mortal Strike should not reduce it, but also if you have a buff that allows you to gain more healing, it also won't be affected by those either. The only thing that got affected is dampening within PvP combat. For the Scale Commanders, the main ability of Bombardments is now not really seeing a lot of changes, but the Dracthyr that you see flying around are going to have a little bit more variety within their Dracthyr models. So it's more of a cosmetic change more than anything. Finally, Devastation sees a very minor adjustment, specifically with the Iridescence buff. So whenever you use a blue empowerment ability like Eternity Surge, you get a buff of Iridescence Blue that buffs your next blue abilities. So now abilities such as Unravel, which is a blue ability, can now be affected by Iridescence Blue, which like I said is a very minor adjustment. Now the class that's seen the biggest amount of changes in this update is probably the Hunter, where we're seeing class changes, hero spec adjustments, and spec specific talent improvements. Over in the class talent tree, we see a new talent of Deathblow, which is a marksmanship talent that now becomes a baseline thing that all 300 specs get to share. Kill Command and Aim Shot have a 10% chance to grant you the use of Deathblow, which makes Kill Shot usable on any target regardless of their health, which is going to heavily integrate the ability of Kill Shot as part of your basic rotation. Then we also have buffs such as Steady Shot, which is technically accessible by all Hunter specs. Steady Shot is now going to natively grant you 10 focus as a baseline update for all specs. They also updated the animations for Volley and Rapid Fire. While Volley does look very different, I was not really able to determine exactly what looks different about Rapid Fire, so some of you may notice it and can let me know in the comments below. The biggest set of changes Hunters have seen is to the Dark Ranger hero talents, which not only changes the playstyle of Dark Ranger, but also really helps juice up that class fantasy. Black Arrow will now replace your Kill Shot ability. Black Arrow will be very similar to Kill Shot, as it will deal a lot of upfront damage, but now will have some residual shadow damage over 10 seconds. And Dark Ranger basically becomes a new Kill Shot spec, and is going to be interacting with the talent of Deathblow in a variety of different ways. With Blink Arrows, all of your auto attacks now deal shadow damage, will bypass enemy armor, but also give those auto attacks a chance to grant you the Deathblow effect. You also have a choice now between Shade Hounds or Soul Drinker. With Hounds, each time Black Arrow deals damage, you have a chance to manifest a Dark Hound to deal shadow damage to that target. For Beastmaster Hunters, whenever you summon a Dire Beast, you have a small chance to summon a Shadow Hound as well as the beast that you summoned. And for Beastmaster Hunters specifically, all Shade Hounds have Beast Cleave available at all times, so they constantly cleave. In the choice note, Soul Drinker allows you, when an enemy affected by Black Arrow when they die, there's a small chance they may grant you a Death Blow effect. Further down, we have a new talent called The Bell Tolls, which allows Black Arrow to be usable on targets above 80% health and below 20% health. Then we have a choice between Phantom Pain or Ebon Bowstring. With Phantom Pain, when you kill command or aim shot a target that is affected by Black Arrow, a portion of that damage is replicated to all targets that are affected by Black Arrow dot. So the more Black Arrows you can spread around, the more cleave output you can do with kill commands as aim shots. But with the talent of Ebon Bowstring, casting Black Arrow just gives it a chance to proc a Death Blow effect, which allows it to chain multiple Black Arrows back to back to back. Then you have a choice between Dark Chains or Shadow Dagger. The chains remains the same as it is on live, but Dagger allows you to, when disengaging, to release a fan of shadow daggers at the targets, which will do some decent shadow damage over time, while slowing those targets for 6 seconds. With Banshee's Mark, your Murder of Crows now deals pure shadow damage, which is very flavorful, but also Black Arrow's initial damage has a 25% chance to summon a Murder of Crows at your target. With Shadow Surge, periodic damage from Black Arrow has a chance to erupt, which deals shadow damage to all foes near that target with a soft cap of about 8 targets. Which means it's going to deal its full damage to the first 8 targets, but all targets after that, like 9th target, 10th target, 11th target, will take reduced damage depending on the number of enemies hit. With Blake Powder, casting Black Arrow while Beast Cleave or Trick Shots is active causes the Black Arrow to explode, dealing additional shadow damage to all nearby targets. And then we have the Caststone of Withering Fire, which functions differently for Beast Mastery or Marksmanship. For Marksman, while 2-Shot is active, and for Beast Mastery, it's after 3 uses of Bestial Wrath, you gain the effect of Withering Fire. With Withering Fire, your hunter surrenders to darkness for 12 seconds. During that time, anytime you gain the Death Blow effect, you instead instantly fire a Black Arrow at the target and 2 additional arrows at nearby targets at 50% effectiveness, which allows you to fire off back-to-back Black Arrows at multiple targets at a time. Besides Dark Ranger changes, we also see adjustments for Beastmaster, Hunter, Marksman, and Survival. With Beastmaster, we see a number of damage changes like multi-shot damage increased by 300%. Barb Shot also sees adjustments as well, where its damage is being increased by 100%, though its cooldown is being changed to 18 seconds, with the duration improved to 12 seconds. But what this also does is it changes things such as Thrill of the Hunt, which also sees the same extension to match things like Barb Shot, and the Frenzy buff applied to your pet is also extended to match the Barb Shot bleed. This is primarily to give the ability a slightly longer cooldown but also longer duration to make it less spammy of an ability, which gives you more reasons to press other abilities in between of your Barb Shot refreshes outside of your kill command, such as your Kill Shot, for example, or the Black Arrow ability from Dark Ranger, or potentially even Cobra Shot in between those Barb Shots. Besides this, BM also sees a number of new talents such as Snakeskin Quiver, where auto shots have a 50% chance to also fire a Cobra Shot at your target. Another talent of Serpentine Rhythm, where casting Cobra Shot increases its damage by 25%, stacking up to 4 times. And upon reaching 4 stacks, it removes the damage buff component and instead grants you a 8% pet buff for 8 seconds. There's also a new talent called Barbed Scales, where casting Cobra Shot helps reduce the cooldown of Barbed Shot by 2 seconds. The talent of Cobra Senses has been redesigned, which reduces the cost of Cobra Shot by 5 focus, but also increases its damage by 35%. Even the talent of Hunter Spray has been redesigned. Kill Shot will now strike 1 additional target and deal 10% increased damage per active pet, up to a maximum of 5, which allows for Dark Ranger to have some big cleave and big AoE capabilities. And lastly, the talent of Training Expert will now cost a single talent point, which will hopefully give you a little bit more talents to spend throughout the rest of your talent tree. Then we have the Spec of Marksmanship, where we see a new talent called Pin Cushion, where casting Steady Shot helps reduce the cooldown of Aim Shot by 2 seconds. It's going to be on the same choice node as Improved Steady Shot, which also got updated, since Steady Shot now natively grants you 10 focus every time you use it. With Improved Steady Shot, it now makes Steady Shot grant you an additional 20 focus instead of 10. Marksmanship Hunters also pick up an improved Death Blow talent, where Aim Shot now has a 50% chance to grant you the effect of Death Blow, Rapid Fire 25% chance to grant you a Death Blow effect, and Kill Shot Critical Strike damage is increased by 25%, which also applies towards the Black Arrow ability. The talent of Precise Shots is renamed to Precise Shot, and it allows Aim Shot to empower your next 1 cast of Arcane Shot, Multi-Shot, or Chimera Shot to deal 100% increased damage instead of 2 shots that deal 70% damage. The talent of Steady Focus was also buffed, where casting Steady Shot increases your haze by 8% for 15 seconds. Previously, you had to do 2 Steady Shots in a row, but now a single Steady Shot will provide you with that haze buff. And the main prime cooldown of True Shot will now natively reduce the cost of Aim Shot, make it a baseline, but also removes the talent that had that effect there initially. Trying to improve the effectiveness of Rapid Fire Barrages by increasing its effectiveness from 30% up to 40%. And the Marksmanship tier set bonus has also been adjusted to account for the changes to Precise Shot, so you shouldn't see a change in your overall gameplay and damage, but it's more of an adjustment just to make sure that you're not losing out on that tier set bonus. And lastly, we have the Survival Hunter, where we're seeing a number of changes. First of all, there's an adjustment towards how survival plays, because right now when it comes to AoE and single target content, you can feel a little bogged down with so many different talents and abilities and procs for you to manage all at the same time. So they're making an adjustment to the talent of Merciless Blows, where instead of giving you rotational impact, it simply buffs your Butchery, allowing it to bleed your targets for heavy damage over 8 seconds. The damage of Butchery is also being increased by 50%, but Butchery no longer has charges, instead it has one 15-second cooldown, making the ability a hard hitter that you'll most likely will end up using even in single target situations, but it also creates a bit more of a simplified rotation for survival going forward. Abilities like Fury of the Eagle also seen adjustments where the damage of Fury of the Eagle is being increased by 25%. The channel time of the ability is reduced to 3 seconds, and the ability instantly consumes a stack of Tip of the Spear. The modifying talent below it, Ruthless Marauder, also got redesigned. It is now a single talent point cost that increases the damage of Fury of the Eagle by 10%, and the damage from Fury of the Eagle has a 20% chance to generate a stack of Tip of the Spear. When Fury of the Eagle ends, it also increases your haste by 8% for 10 seconds. But Kill Command can no longer reduce the cooldown of Fury of the Eagle. The talent of Exposed Flank has also been adjusted. Instead of letting your kill command cleave for the next 10 seconds, it'll now empower your next kill command after using Flank and Strike to deal 50% increased damage, strike up to 3 nearby targets, and generate a stack of Tip of the Spear for each target that the empowered cleaving kill command strikes. The talent of Frenzy Strikes also seen a buff where Wildfire Bomb cooldown reduction per target is increased to 3 seconds to account for the longer cooldown of the ability of Butchery. And the talent of Killer Companion has also been buffed up, increasing the kill command damage by 10 and 20%, up from 5 and 10%. Survival also seen a number of changes when it comes to the hero specs, specifically Pack Leader, where we see things such as Howl of the Pack increasing the Wildfire Bomb damage by 20%, and Wild Attacks also gets an additional bonus effect that increases the damage of your Raptor Strikes or Mongoose Bite by 20% to make it a little bit more competitive. As a Sentinel Survival Hunter, Symphonic Arsenal gets a damage bonus increased to 200% in order to account for the Butchery adjustment. Up next, we have the class of Mages, where we're seeing another adjustment towards the weight buff of Arcane Brilliance, also reducing mana cost down to 1% of their base mana. We also got some adjustments such as a visual update for Alter Time, as well as a brand new icon for Shifting Power. And mages that spec into Ice Flows can now open up portals while having Ice Flows buff active, whether you want to put up a portal for your friends or just teleport yourself to places directly. The first set of changes we see for mages is in their hero spec, starting with the Frostfire, where we see a change to Excess Fire. Instead of providing Frost and Fire mages a way to apply a Living Bomb to a target, it instead changes to a Frostfire Burst, which deals moderate Frostfire damage but helps contribute towards the Frostfire Mastery. The damage of Frostfire Burst is increased by 25%, and the damage of Frostfire Infusion has been further increased by 50%. And the meteors and comet storms spawned by Asothermic Core is also being increased. For Frost Mages, that's a 50% buff for their meteor, and for Fire Mages, that's a 25% buff towards the comet storms. Frost and Arcane Mages are getting a new talent towards the Spellslinger hero spec, specifically one that competes with Shifting Shards, called Signature Spell. For Arcane Mages, whenever they have their Magi Spark explode, they get to conjure 6 Arcane Splinters. But for Frost Mages, whenever they consume Winter's Chill effect with a Glacial Spike, they conjure 2 additional Frost Splinters, which allows you a different way to generate Frost Splinters outside of major big cooldowns such as Shifting Power. And the talent of Splintering Orbs can now generate up to a maximum of 6 Splinters, which was previously a maximum of 4. Finally, we have Sun Fury with a buff towards Gravity Lapse. The ability of Gravity Lapse now hits 8 targets instead of 5, and it also stuns those targets in PvE content, but it still is a route within PvP. Gravity Lapse does get a slightly longer cooldown of 40 seconds rather than 30 seconds. And the meteorites summoned through Glorious Incandescence are now instant, so they no longer have the weird delay where they can sometimes miss your target. Out of all 3 specs of mages, Arcane is probably seeing the biggest swath of adjustments, specifically within your talent of Aether Vision. Nether Precision will no longer allow you to double dip between Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage. However, they're basically making that Nether Precision double dipping into a separate mechanic called Aether Vision. Consuming Nether Precision with Arcane Blast will increase the damage of your next Arcane Barrage by 10% and will cause the barrage to generate 2 Arcane charges. This effect can stack up to 2 times, called Aether Vision. which still allows you to use Arcane Blast into barrages to maintain your full stacks of Arcane charges to continue pumping out maximum damage while buffing the output of your Arcane Barrage ability. Then we got a handful of other talents adjusted, such as Time Loop, which has been updated to also increase the duration of Arcane Delimitation by 2 seconds, and its chance to proc is increased to 25%. Blade Drinker talent has also been updated. It no longer affects Arcane Barrage, but mostly plays around Arcane Blast, and causes your Touch of the Magic to also grant Blade Drinker guaranteed, and Blade Drinker's chance to proc is increased to 25%. The talent of Charge Orb has been updated to also buff the damage of Arcane Orb damage, which basically allows it to take the Resonant Orbs talent, which was removed, and bake straight into Charge Orbs. The talent of Consortium's Bauble has been updated to increase the Arcane Blast damage by 8% while reducing its mana cost by 5%. Next, Arcane Mage has got a few changes towards the spellslinger playstyle to try to make it a little bit more appealing, such as the actual Arcane Splinter damage being increased by 26%. The talent of Spellfrost Teaching's proc effect has been reduced down to 2%, but it now actually properly buffs the damage of Arcane Orb by 10%, which apparently previously it just didn't. This combined with some of the talent changes in the Arcane Mage talent tree should make the Orb playstyle a little bit more potent. Splinterstorm now has a 5% chance to generate a stack of clear casting, and the Unnerving Proficiency bonus has been increased to 20% rather than 16%. Arcane Sun Fury has also seen a number of changes, where Glorious Incandescence now causes Arcane Barrages to deal 30% increased damage in addition to its previous effect, though the talent of Burden of Power can no longer benefit from Arcane Barrages, only stuck strictly to Arcane Blasts. Also, Memory of Alar has been adjusted for Arcane, where the soul extension amount is now increased to 1 second instead of half a second, which gives you a longer Memory of Alar Arcane Soul window. From there we move on to the Speck of Fire, where Majesty of the Phoenix has been updated, where casting Phoenix Flames causes your next Flame Strike to be increased by 20%, and its critical strike damage increased by 20%, stacking up to 3 times. Fire Mages though do take an overall 3% ability damage reduction, which isn't crazy, but it does lower down some of the overall power, though they are breaking it back through some of the other components, such as Lit Fuse trying to make a comeback this time around. Lit Fuse now has a 6% chance to proc, which was initially a 4% chance. With Explosive Ingenuity, Lit Fuse chance to proc is increased by an additional 4%, while its damage is being increased by 50% instead of 25%. Though with the baseline damage buffs towards the Living Bomb ability, Explosiva's Living Bomb damage while Combust is active is reduced to 30%, which was originally 40%. But the talent of Sparking Cinders now procs 3 times per minute instead of 2 times, and the damage bonus is now a little bit more normalized between Pyroblast and Flame Strike, both increased by 15%. As a Fire Mage playing the Sun Fury playstyle, Glorious Incandescence has then been updated and now causes Fire Blast to hit up to 2 additional targets in addition to its previous effect. And yes, those extra additional cleaves of Fire Blast can proc heating up in AoE content. The talent of Burden of Power has been adjusted to increase the damage of your Pyroblast by 20%, initially 15%, and the Flame Strike damage by 30%, initially 60%. But similar to Arcane Mage's, Memory of Alar Hypothermia extension amount is increased to 1 second rather than half a second. For Frost Mages, the mostly seen buffs towards the Spellslinger playstyle, specifically Frost Splinter's damage being increased by 44%. Spellfrost Teaching's proc rate has also been reduced down to 2.5%, while the Spellfrost Orb damage is being increased by 30%. The damage bonus for Unnerving Proficiency is being increased up to 5%. In the main capstone ability, Splinterstorm now has a 5% chance to grant you Brain Freeze procs. Then we have the class of Monk, where just like some of the other classes out there, we've seen adjustments to a handful of icons and abilities. For Monks, we've seen changes towards the Jade Fire Stump ability, as well as a visual adjustment for Weapons of Order. Then we see a number of changes towards the Shadowpan playstyle, where they added an energy tracker to track Flurry Strikes as a passive buff within your buff window of your character. So now you can more or less tell exactly how much energy you have generated and how much energy you need before you proc the Flurry Strikes ability. Flurry Strikes are also no longer cancelable and no longer have a duration to make it a little bit less necessary for players to game the ability of Flurry Strikes. Though Flurry Strikes do get to unleash themselves more often, where the energy threshold of this ability is being reduced from 300 down to 240, so you'll get regular uses of Flurry Strikes. Because of more regular uses of Flurry Strikes, its damage is being reduced slightly, only by 8%, to account for getting way more procs of the ability. Because you're getting more procs of Flurry Strike's Wisdom of the Wall buff is also being reduced a little bit from a 20-second duration down to a 16-second duration. And also talents such as Against All Odds have been reduced from a 6-second duration down to a 5-second, also to account for the flurry changes. Besides this, a huge portion of the monk changes are going to focus on Mistweavers. First of all, we have Dome of Mist, which was initially a PvP talent but now becomes a baseline passive of Mistweaver, which adds Dispel Protection for Enveloping Mist within PvP combat, allowing it to transform from an Enveloping Mist to a Dome of Mist, which has some anti-dispel protection for PvP. It's just a buff for Mistweavers for PvP specifically, but those of you that run dungeons or raids won't notice a difference with this change. Ancient Teachings is another buff that's also now become baseline for all monks. It still does the exact same thing by allowing you to transfer the damage of your physical attacks such as Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick, and Rising Sun Kick, but now adds the ability of crackling Jade Lightning into the mix, though they changed the transfer rate down to 30% from the original 170%. Though you can still always pick up Jade Fire Teachings to bring up the Ancient Teachings healing all the way back up to its old value, while also allowing Jade Fire Teachings to proc from either drinking a Thunder Focus Tea or from using the ability of Jade Fire Stomp. Though now Jade Fire Teachings competes with a brand new talent called Russian Wind Kick, which is on the same row, which changes your Rising Sun Kick to become a ranged Wind Kick ability that now has a cleave component and scales its damage the more targets that it hits. When you use the ability, it also buffs the healing of all of your Renewing Mist by 50%, which allows it to synergize with some of the Renewing Mist based gameplay. There's also two talents that modify the ability of Life Cocoon, such as Refreshment as well as Common Coalescence. With Refreshment, Life Cocoon grants you 5 stacks of mana tea instantly and applies 2 stacks of healing elixir on your target, which gives them fairly sizable big percent healing on that ally. Or with Common Coalescence, you could simply just increase the absorb value of Life Cocoon by 80%. Another new talent that's been added is Jade Empowerment, where casting Thunder Focus Tea increases your next crackling Jade Lightning's damage by, on Blue Post it says 1000%, though on PTR it was up to 800%, so there may be some discrepancies with that number once this goes live. It also causes the ability to chain to 4 additional enemies while doing significantly more damage, which can synergize with the monk's damage to heal type of gameplay, and offers quite a powerful option, especially if you play the Jade Fire Teachings playstyle. Besides this, Mistweaver gains some baseline buffs such as a buff towards Blackout Kick, increasing that damage by 25%. They also baking in Awakened Jade Fire into Ancient Concordance, which allows the talent to also increase your Blackout Kick's cleave, giving it 2 additional targets that it can strike at 70% effectiveness. Also, the buff to the effectiveness of Crackling Jade Lightning for Mistweavers, allowing it to channel 25% faster, so it allows you to get most of its damage out in a much shorter window. When it comes to Windwalker, we're seeing adjustments towards some handful of their abilities, such as Blackout Kick's damage increased by 20%, while Flurry of Zoen is being increased by 40%. Though all of these bugs do come in with a bit of a fix towards the talent of Courageous Impulse, which incorrectly overbuffed the damage of Blackout Kicks as well as the teachings of the Monastery Blackout Kick procs. Then we have the class of Paladin, which is primarily seeing class talent updates to give Paladins better class fantasy, but also a little bit more of a support class type of feel, as well as gameplay as of 11.05 update. First of all, we're seeing mainly talent and positional changes that adjust the core abilities and passives, some of the more common abilities that most Paladins pick up for most situations, to be in a much better spot so you can easily pick them up without having to sacrifice any talent points otherwise. We also have talents such as Imperial Ward becoming a great external defensive to provide to other tank classes, as it's available for all 3 specs, but for protection in particular, that provides them with a significant buff towards the survivability regarding the armor. Blessing of Freedom is now on a choice node with a Divine Seed Freedom, which one is a active buff that you apply on a target, while the other is a passive that applies on you every time you use Divine Seed ability. However, as Ret and Prop Pally, if you have a shareable freedom, whenever you mount up on a steed, it'll provide one of your allies and freedom as well for free. The ability of Divine Toll is in a much easier to grab spot, as well as some of the other talents such as Divine Purpose, though it now competes with a new choice of Sacred Strength, which simply increases the effectiveness for your holy power spenders. Then we have majority of the interesting talents found towards the bottom rows, such as Lead the Charge, where Divine Steed will reduce the cooldown of 4 nearby allies' major movement ability by 3 seconds, and your movement speed passively is increased by 3%. With Worthy Sacrifice, you'll be able to automatically cast Blessing of Sacrifice on any ally that dips below 35% health if the ability is available. Or you could protect allies from all poison and disease effects when you apply Blessing of Sacrifice on that target. With Holy Ritual, you will now be able to heal allies whenever you cast one of your blessings on them, and they'll also healed again once the blessing fades. With Blessed Calling, allies affected by a blessing now have 50% more movement speed. With Inspired Guard, Divine Protection and Ardent Defender, depending on the spec, will increase the healing taken by you by 50% during the defensive's duration. With Stoicism, the duration of all stun effects is reduced on you by 20%, which seems a little bit busted in PvE and PvP. With Selfless Healer, Flash of Light is now 30% more effective when used on your ally, and 40% of that healing is also heals you as well. A new Capstone of Lightbearer allows 10% of all healing done to you through other sources like other players, not your own self-healing, to also heal up to 4 nearby allies divided evenly, which basically empowers any healing done to you by 10% split amongst all of your allies. And then we have a powerful defensive Capstone of Light's Revocation. Removing harmful effects with Divine Shield will also heal you for 10% of your maximum health for each effect removed, up to 30% maximum. Divine Shield may also now be cast while Forbearance buff is currently active on you, which gives the bubble defensive a little bit more of this emergency value, allowing you to freely use your Forbearance abilities a little bit more aggressively. We also get some changes towards the Lightsmith playstyle, specifically 2 new talents, like Authoritative Rebuke, where successfully interrupting an enemy's spellcast reduces the rebuke's cooldown by 1 second. This effect is increased by 100% while wielding a holy armament, so it's a great option for protection paladins to become an interrupt master within dungeons. Next, we have Tempered in Battle, where if you or an ally are wielding a holy bulwark, specifically the shield, the absorb effect, healing the target that's wielding the bulwark above maximum health will transfer 100% of that overhealing to the other ally wielding the bulwark, which makes sure that any overhealing doesn't get wasted. And when you or an ally holding the sacred weapon for damage or more healing, if either one of you drops below 40% health, you now redistribute your health immediately and every 1 second for the next 4 seconds, which allows Holy Paladins to have some emergency automatic healing whenever an ally wielding a weapon drops super low on health. Besides this, Holy Paladin self-healing and overall healing is being increased by 3%. Word of Glory healing specifically is being further increased by 5%, and the Shield of the Righteous damage is amplified by 10%. Protection Paladin changes, however, a little bit no nuance, as they're getting a new talent of Refining Fire, where enemies struck by Avenger's Shield will now burn with Holy Fire, suffering damage over time, which is a significant bit of overall damage. The overall Protection Paladin damage is increased by 6%, Word of Glory healing increased by 20%, base armor protection increased by 10%, armor from Shield of the Righteous further increased by 10 additional percent, and the damage of the Shield of the Righteous increased by 20%, which is just buffs all across the board. But then they did something even better. Blessed Hammer, Judgment, and Hammer of the Righteous cooldown is now reduced by 10%, which allows you to build holy power a little bit quicker to make sure you always have a shield or a Word of Glory ready to keep yourself alive and ready for battle. Inmost Light cooldown reduction is also being increased by 33%, up from the original 25%, which makes playstyles like Templar Protection a little bit more feasible. But also talents such as Gift of the Valkyr, as well as Uther's Counsel, all are reduced down to a single talent point cost, which allows those talents to double their value. Lastly, we have the spec of Retribution Paladin, which gains a 6% damage buff, and the Word of Glory healing is increased by 10%. Not as many changes as the other specs, but at least it's a nice little buff either way. From there, we got the class of Priest, which isn't getting too many changes. Like all the other classes that bring a raid buff, Priest with a power word Fortitude are seeing its mana cost reduced from 4% maximum mana down to 1% max mana. From there, we got a small number of changes for the hero spec, starting with Archon and the talent of Sustained Potency, which has gotten updated with an additional effect. It now also pauses the duration of Apotheosis, Dark Ascension, and Void form for up to 20 seconds while out of combat, or when affected by a loss of control effect, to make sure that whether you're doing dungeons, raiding, or PvP, if for some reason you hit with a crowd control, you don't lose out on the value of your overall major cooldown, which is quite interesting. As for Void Reaver, it's mostly a PvP adjustment where Entropic Rift now has a different animation and a different visual within PvP combat, so you can now tell between a friendly Entropic Rift and a hostile enemy Entropic Rift, which you'd want to avoid. Allies will also will see a low noise version of an Entropic Rift instead of not being able to see the ability at all when you're on the same team as the Shadow Priest. Lastly, we see a slight adjustment towards Holy Priest with the talent From Darkness Comes Light, which will now also proc from your Holy Fire damage abilities, which I guess gives it a little bit more functionality. Then we got some actually good and exciting changes for the class of Rogue with a lot of new baseline additions, like Thrill Seeking, which allows you to gain either 2 Shadow Steps or 2 grappling hooks. No longer will Outlaw have a Shadow Step, but instead you'll have 2 grapple hooks which can synergize with Fatebound for plenty of additional mobility. Supercharger also takes place of Echo and Reprimand, which is going to be a huge advantage since it actually plays a little bit better than Echoing and is just overall more effective. Using Shiv, Roll the Bones, or Symbols of Death supercharges your common points, and damaging finisher moves that consume those supercharged common points will now function as if you spend 2 additional common points on that finisher. Then you can further upgrade the ability of Force Induction, which increases the bonus of granted by the supercharger by 1, or allow you to get Echo and Reprimand, which after consuming supercharged common point, an Mutilate, Sunstrike, or Backstab strikes at the target with a free Echo and Reprimand that just deals physical damage but doesn't generate additional common points. With talents such as Thistlety, you now will automatically consume a charge of Thistlety whenever your energy falls below 30. Which gives a bit of more passive gameplay. Cut to the Chase basically grants Slice and Dice for free whenever you use certain abilities, which also allows Slice and Dice to be a passive that no longer needs to be maintained on your bars. The talent of Soothe the Darkness Healing has overall been increased to 30% of your max health instead of 15, but this ability no longer procs from abilities such as Shadow Dance. The duration of crowd control moves within PvE content, specifically Cheap Shot, has now been extended to 6 seconds rather than 4 seconds. The duration of this ability, however, for PvP content like Arenas and Battlegrounds has been unchanged. The defense of Feint now is off of the global cooldown, so you can use it in between your basic combat abilities, and it no longer forces a GCD on your abilities. The talent of Subterfuge has also been adjusted, so now it grants additional duration bonuses to stealth effects. So think of talents such as Improved Corrode, Indiscriminate Carnage, Master Assassin, and Take It by Surprise. We also saw a handful of hero talent changes for the class of Rogue, starting with Fatebound, where Deliver Doom now scales in its power depending on how many targets are near you. Also, the talent of Edge Case will now flip a coin instantly as soon as you use Deathmark of Adrenaline Rush, which is mostly a better adjustment for rotational capabilities. From there, we have the spec of Assassination, where Twist the Knife enables Envenom's combat buff of extra chances for you to poison the target to now be able to overlap itself 2 times, which allows you to create a ramp up where you can have 2 buffs of Envenom active at the same time, which can further increase your gameplay, but also may create some rotational complexity that could lead to significant damage gains as Assassination. For the spec of Outlaw, the talent of Crackshot also gains an additional bonus to now also reset the cooldown of Between the Eyes whenever you gain Stealth. So whenever you vanish, it lets you reset the cooldown of Between the Eyes ability. The talent of Precise Cuts has also been buffed up to now increase the Blade Flayer's damage by 4% per missing target below its maximum, which was originally 2%. And the Big Capstone ability of Keep It Rolling has had its big cooldown reduced from 7 minutes down to 6 minutes, which is a significant gain. For the spec like Subtlety, you get a new talent called Death Perception, where Symbols of Death now has 1 to 2 additional charges and increases your damage down by an additional 3 and 6%, so up to 16% maximum damage buff whenever Symbols of Death is active. However, it does mean you lose Invigorating Shadow Dust, which means you no longer have cooldown reduction baked in as part of your class. Therefore, they're adjusting the cooldown of Shadow Blades, reducing it down to 1.5 minutes to better match Flagellation, but they're also reducing its duration down to 16 seconds. Finally, the talent of First Dance has been massively redesigned, where remaining out of combat for 6 seconds increases the duration of your next Shadow Dance by 4 seconds. However, in PvP, those values are a little bit different. Remaining out of combat for 10 seconds will increase the duration of your Shadow Dance by 2 seconds, so it no longer grants you 4 comm points instantly. Then we have a number of changes coming to the class of the Shaman, starting with the raid buff of Sky Fury, which like all the other classes sees a cost reduction down to 1% of base mana. All Shaman specs also get new Ascendants form from an Air Ascendant, Fire Ascendant, and a Water Ascendant depending on your spec. However, you'll also be able to gain glyphs found in your class Order Hall from Legion in order to get different variations of Ascendants, like a second version that has more wilder hair, but also being able to go back to the original Missa Pandaria version. Talents such as Poison Cleansing Totem have actually been seeing a bit of a nerf, where the ability, instead of having a 45-second cooldown, will now have a 2-minute cooldown instead. They also have updated the visuals for the ability of Lava Burst, which is absolutely satisfying, and they updated the icon for the Primordial Wave ability. Besides this, we also saw a few hero talent adjustments, such as the Ancestors will now prefer to use the Chain Lightning ability on your current target or any enemies that are standing in Earthquake, so they'll be a little bit less wild. But also Ancestors will now wear Shaman tier sets from older expansions, so they have a bit of a different visual look to them. We also got adjustments to the Stormbringer playstyle, which gains the talent of Lightning Conduit, which grants you a random proc for additional movement speed, but also when you reincarnate, you use the Thunderstorm ability. The talent of Arc Discharge is now a solo talent that hangs out all by itself and gains quite a significant power for both enhancement and elemental. Then we have a new choice between Storm Swell, which allows Tempest to grant you a mastery buff, or Supercharge, where Lightning Bolt, Tempest, and Chain Lightning have a 50% chance to cause an additional overload as elemental, or refund 2 Maelstrom weapon stacks as enhancement. And even the defensive talents such as Nature's Protection will now provide you 3% less damage taken while your Lightning Shield is active, or another talent that enables after casting Tempest to increase the healing of your next healing ability, such as Chain Heal or Healing Surge. When it comes to elemental shaman talents, we saw a ton of new updates that help unify all of the shaman's elements together, creating a little bit less of a separation between a lightning build and a lava build. And you'll kind of want to combine all of these talents together, or rather all the elements together, in order to create a more cohesive playstyle. All base damage of elemental, however, is seen as slight 8% damage reduction, but we do see a number of buffs with the new talents and abilities. Lava Burst damage buffed by 32%, Earthquake damage buffed by 17%, Elo Blast damage buffed by 12%, and Frost Shock damage buffed by an additional 30%. New talents such as Herald of the Storm allow Lightning Bolts and Chain Lightnings to reduce the cooldown of Stormkeeper by 2 seconds. However, other forms of cooldown reduction are being removed from Elemental Shaman, so this is the only cooldown reduction that the class is going to have. New talent of Erupting Lava increases the duration of Flame Shock by 6 seconds, but also allows Lava Burst to consume up to 3 seconds of Flame Shock to instantly deal the damage to the target, and Lava Burst Overloads do the same at 50% effectiveness. New talent of Charge Conduit increases the duration of Lightning Rod by 4 seconds, but also increases its damage bonus by 25%. The new talent of Earth Shatter increases the damage bonuses of Earth Shock and Earthquake by 8%, and increases the stat gain from Elemental Blast by 25%. Ascendance is now a core talent that's centered towards the middle row of the elemental talent tree, but it also has been wildly adjusted. When you press Ascendance, you transform into a Flame Ascendant for 15 seconds, instantly casting Flame Shock and a Lava Burst at 6 nearby foes. While Ascended, elemental overload damage is increased by 150%, and spells affected by Mastery of Elemental Overload now cause 1 additional overload. On top of it, the Elemental Shaman's Mastery has also been further improved to also increase the damage of your pets as well. The talent of Ice Fury can now trigger for multiple spellcasts such as Lightning Bolts, Chain Lightning, in addition to Lava Burst. And Ice Fury causes your next Frost Shock to be empowered and cleave up to 4 nearby additional targets. The Wind Gust buff from the Storm Elemental will now grant you a haste buff instead of a casting speed reduction buff for your Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning abilities. The talent of Deeply Rooted Elements will now proc off of Earth Shocks, Elemental Blasts, and Earthquakes instead of simply Lava Burst, which makes it a little bit more better for unification of all these elements. Whenever you use the ability of Primordial Wave, you now also instantly gain a charge of Lava Surge. And the Liquid Magma Totem now generates additional Maelstrom. Both your Fire Elemental as well as Storm Elementals now have a little bit less of a duration. Instead of lasting for 30 seconds, then it'll last for 20 seconds. And the smaller Elementals summoned through Echo of the Elementals, instead of lasting for 15 seconds, they only last for 10 seconds. Though we also see significant buffs towards the Farseer playstyle of Elemental Shaman, especially with Routine Communication, which now can proc off of abilities such as Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, Ice Fury, and Frost Shocks on top of Lava Burst. The Routine Communication now has a 5% chance to proc a Call Ancestor instead of an 8% chance. Besides Elemental, Enhancement also sees a number of new talent options as well as some positional adjustments. First of all, Flowing Spirits is a new talent that can be swapped out instead of Feral Spirit to replace the Feral Spirit button into more of a passive proc. Whenever you do damage, you have a chance to call spirits instead of actively summoning them yourself. A new talent of Molten Thunder has the cooldown of Sundering reduced by 10 seconds, but it no longer incapacitates foes. Instead, Storm Surge effect now has a small chance to reset the cooldown of Sundering. A new talent of Voltaic Blaze allows Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning to buff up your next Flame Shock to turn it into a Voltaic Blaze, causing it to deal massive nature damage and cleaving up to 5 targets while also affecting them with a Flame Shock, as well as generating new stacks of Maelstrom. A new talent of Unrelenting Storms allows Crash Lightning to be better when used against a single target, allowing it to also activate Wind Fury weapon on its hit and also have its cooldown reduced by 40%. Ice Strike now has a couple of different ways you can modify the ability. Either keep the original or take a more passive approach with it, where spending Maelstrom has a chance to turn your next Frost Shock into an Ice Strike, allowing the ability to be ranged but also maintaining all the same functionality. The talent of Storm Blast has also been adjusted, where Storm Strike will now gain an additional charge. Instead of 1 charge, now it has 2. And Storm Surge now causes the next Storm Strike to deal 25% additional damage as nature damage, stacking up to 2 times. Also, it buffs your damage of your main hand ability, but also your offhand ability as well. Then we have a pretty sizable change towards Ascendance as well as Deeply Rooted Elements, as Thorns of Vacation has been adjusted to now reduce the cooldown of Ascendance down to 2 minutes instead of 3, but Deeply Rooted Elements now last 2 seconds longer. Deeply Rooted Elements ability also now procs off of spending Maelstrom instead of Storm Strikes, though they did adjust the actual proc rate or the chance for it to proc to be a little bit lower. The damage of Flame Tongue weapon has also been improved by 20% as of this update, and the talent of Doomwinds now has more of an AoE and cleave single target component, which allows the ability to still retain a lot of its power from single target aspects, but also allows it to cleave all enemies around you, making it more universal. Besides this, enhancement shamans as a totemic playstyle have also seen significant buffs, with things such as the searing totem effect of the original reactivity baked in into lively totems, and the new reactivity has now been redesigned. While Hot Hand is active, Lava Lash now shatters the earth, causing sundering at a 30% effectiveness. Also, the capstone of Totemic has also been wildly adjusted, with its fire, air, and earth effects completely changed. The Fire buff allows your next Lava Lash after dropping the totem, or your Fire Nova, to grant you guaranteed hot hands for 8 seconds. With Earth, dealing direct damage with your Flame Shock is now increased by 300%, and Flame Shock is also applied to 5 nearby targets. With Air, your next Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning or Elemental Blast unleashes 3 Surging Bolts back to your totem. Also, spending Maelstrom is how you end up unleashing Surging Bolts to your totem in general, which is no longer tied strictly to the Storm Strike ability. Also, the talent of Beyond Mastery has been largely increased, where it now increases the chance for Wind Fury proc by 10%, increases damage by 15%, and one Flame Tongue weapon procs from Wind Fury weapon attacks has a chance to gather a whirl of flame around the target, dealing its damage to all nearby enemies 3 additional times. As for Restoration Shaman, we saw a handful of changes such as Coalescing Water talent, where Chain Heal increases the initial healing of your next Riptide by 75%, stacking up to 2 times, but the talent also reduces the mana cost of Chain Heal by 15%. The talent of Reactive Warding has been adjusted and will now also allow your Earth Shield and Water Shield to consume charges of the shield 1 second faster, which means overall more healing of the Earth Shield, but also potentially more chances for you to have to refresh it more often. When it comes to the Restoration playstyle of the Totemic, they also made sure that the talent of Lively Totems, instead of causing your totems to use the Chain Heal ability, now the Chain Heal ability is used passively from the Shaman. This is to make certain and to make sure that all talents that play around the Chain Heal ability will now fully function with the Lively Totem's passive proc, because instead of your totem having to use it, which sometimes wouldn't benefit, now your Shaman is the one that actively uses the Chain Heal ability, which should gain all the benefits of the rest of your talent tree. When it comes to the class of Warlock, we don't see too many changes. We do see an adjustment towards the Soul Rod ability, which is going to get a different icon, but primarily what we see in this time around in 1105 is a change for Destruction as Diabolist, specifically to the main gameplay of the Diabolic Ritual. Normally, Diabolic Ritual functions off of you being able to spend Soul Shards as a Warlock, but this has been adjusted for Destruction to work differently. So instead of working off of Soul Shard spending, it instead works off of uses of abilities such as Chaos Bolt, Rain of Fire, and Shadowborn, which reduce the duration of Diabolic Ritual by 1 second. This allows them to equalize the effectiveness of all these abilities, specifically the discrepancy between the Chaos Bolt as well as Rain of Fire. But then they also take a step further with the Taunted Touch of Rancora, where they also inject a bonus effect for Chaos Bolt to reduce the duration of Diabolic Ritual by 1 additional second, where Rain of Fire is normally a more conservative playstyle when it comes to soul shard spending that is more effective at reducing your Diabolic Ritual. Now Chaos Bolt becomes a more effective option, at least when it comes to pure single target situations, which will hopefully adjust Diabolus to function a little bit better and more comprehensive as the destruction, allowing Chaos Bolt to retain its overall effectiveness as a primary soul shard spender, at least in pure single target. Now the last class seeing a number of changes for 1105 update is the Warrior, though for Warriors it is primarily nerfs almost all across the board. Starting with things such as your Thunderous Roar, which is going to have a soft cap of 5 targets, which is currently right now soft cap to 8 targets. Basically, it means that the ability is now going to do a little bit less damage beyond 5 targets. And when it comes to the playstyle of the Slayer, we do see a slight reduction with the Overwhelming Blades. Instead of allowing it to stack up to 12 times maximum, that is being reduced down to 10 stacks max. Further nerfs are hitting specs such as the Fury Warrior, which previously has had its ability of Warbreaker deal AoE damage uncapped to all targets around you. Well, now they're putting a soft cap of this ability, while its damage is going to be reduced beyond 5 targets. And for the spec of Fury Warrior, we are seeing slight damage buffs, but there's a bit of caveat to it. Like Bloodthirst is being increased by 30%, your Rage and Blow is increased by 25%, but neither of these abilities are affected by reckless abandon variations of Bloodthirst and Raging Blow. So it only buffs the base version but not the upgraded version. This is to try to make the playstyle of anger management a little bit better. Or at least it's an attempt to try to make the playstyle a little bit better, though it's not always the Warrior's favorite, at least as of this season. Oh, I guess we also should nerf Fury as well. Why not, right? Because the ability of Odin's Fury is also seeing a bit of a nerf, where they're soft capping it from an 8 target soft cap down to a 5 target soft cap. So instead of dealing reduced damage beyond 8 targets, it now deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets. So isn't that great? Warriors are so happy with this build, aren't you? What are they even doing with you guys in 1105? But with everything being said, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching this video, and I hope all of you guys enjoyed this 1105 update. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it, because this was a long project, so any kind of appreciation would be awesome. Also, join our Discord community if you want to keep up to the regular 1105 updates and future guides that we'll be posting on the channel, but also we'll be doing more discussions over in the Discord as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Which classes do you think would deserve in buffs and which ones probably didn't deserve the nerfs that we've gotten? And as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.